So this is a trial video log about my carnivore journey. I have to give a talk on it, I think, in a week or two, or perhaps a bit longer, but this month, or next month rather, anyway. So I thought I should try and recap. It's become quite complicated. Um, to summarize, I started eating carnivore in April, and I was quite strict for about the first month. And after a month, um, I sort of acclimatized to the diet after about 2 weeks, and then had nothing to report. I just continued to eat that way. And after about a month, I experienced a wave of energy flow through me, and I just felt completely invigorated, and my stamina and well-being rose vertically, and it continued at the very high level for about 2 months. And I set about doing all sorts of things, and I really felt that I'd come upon a new lease of life. And then I became unwell, and my vigor gradually decreased, leaving me feeling actually rather poorly and unable to get any much exercise, disturbed in my sleep. Um, those were the main disturbances, I think, and pain in my joints. And so I felt disappointed, but I continued to eat carnivore. I occasionally added something to it, like perhaps a bit of broccoli or a banana or something. But 95% of my diet was meat and eggs, and I continued to have dairy products, but limited: cheese, butter, and cream. And I continued forever to drink coffee, um, but both regular and decaf. I'm a bit of a coffee addict. So gradually, my health seemed to return, but it never came back to anywhere near the vigor that I'd experienced before. Gradually, I became, stronger, and I started to try to exercise more regularly, and I began to get into it. But then again, more illness came over me, and my strength was sapping away, and my rest was disturbed. And that was sort of yo-yoed between quite good and not very good at all for about, for several months, really. And then about a month ago, I had a sort of a drop off a cliff, and I found myself, as the cold weather came along, I realized I couldn't get warm. Um, I always felt cold in the house and going outside. And I was going outside a bit more regularly because I'd started smoking a pipe by this time, and I only smoke outside. So I endured this condition for about a month. That's how long it's been going on for. And then a few days ago now, so it's up to the present, I started looking into it, and I found a fellow who was saying, you can't, a pure meat diet isn't going to be beneficial for everybody all the time. And you need to get some vegetables and some carbohydrates to stimulate the production of something called glutathione. I think you could probably take it as a supplement, but I don't understand supplements very well, and I thought, well, if I can increase it by having some carbs and having some spinach, or I didn't actually have spinach, I had broccoli, then that I would prefer that. So I did that yesterday and the day before, and I had pasta and spinach the day before yesterday and yesterday, with garlic and a little bit of olive oil. A very unusual meal. I'd not had something like that for about 9 months, all in all. And I seem to have survived it. I don't know whether it's had the intended effect. I don't feel quite so cold today, although I don't feel an urge to eat pasta and spinach again just now. I did, though, yesterday, which would be the second day of that type of a diet, because when it came to evening time, having had pasta and spinach for lunch, I was thinking to myself, well, what shall I have for dinner? I wanted a second meal, and I had my steak in the fridge. But I didn't want a steak. I wanted some more pasta, so I made pasta with tomatoes and garlic and olive oil, and it was very nice, and plenty of cheddar cheese. And I really enjoyed it. I'm not feeling great today either. I had a bit of a stomach problem, digestion during the night, but nothing major. So that's where I am now, and I don't know. I guess I'm still carnivore. I had a carnivore breakfast this morning. I don't intend to stop being carnivore, but that's just the state of play. I think it's a question, I suppose it's a question of detoxification, but it could also be a question of the personal aspects of diet, you see, because diet's a very personal thing. I was speaking to my sister about it, and she's pretty informed, um, although we have some differences, as one does. But she pointed out that the gut microbiome varies greatly from individual to individual and is a dynamic thing, and it changes through time, of course. And so, one man's meat is another man's poison is absolutely true. There are plenty of videos of people saying that they have 100% carnivore and they feel great on it, but it might not be for everybody. In fact, it probably wouldn't be. It is a very extreme diet, in actual fact. Now, I used to be a baker in the olden days. I worked for a bakery in Oxford, a very distinguished bakery. I was only there for 2 years, but it was my first proper, job with a title, I suppose, eventually. Although I fell into it, I became more interested. And then the firm closed, unfortunately. But we used to make plenty of, we didn't make bread, we made cakes and Christmas puddings and mince pies, all the sorts of things that on carnivore you're not even meant to even mention. And as Christmas came around, I found myself thinking, well, why not have a mince pie? And so I had one, and it was just delicious. So the next day I had another one, and then I bought 6 from the co-op or from a supermarket, and I had them, and then I looked at the ingredients list, or I started by looking at the ingredients lists, and I wasn't very happy with what was in them. So I thought, well, I am a baker, I can make short crust pastry, and I certainly can. And so I made a batch of mince pies, telling myself that I would share them with my neighbours. And I made, I think, 12, and they seemed to disappear. So I didn't share them with my neighbours. You see, because I had then realised that I make them with lard, or I made them with lard. And because my neighbours are Muslims, it wouldn't be right to give them lard because they don't eat it. So I realised I'd have to make them again, but use only butter, and I did that. And I made 12, and I was planning to give them to my neighbour. In the end, I gave my neighbour 8 and subtracted 4 for myself. And then it seemed to me that made with butter, they weren't quite as good as when made with lard, but I couldn't be sure. So I had to make another batch with lard to see if I was right. And I gave some of those away too. And I think I made another batch. I have really, if I've eaten less than 50, if I'd eaten less than 50 mince pies during the Christmas period, I would be very surprised. It might be a low estimate. So I reactivated the sugar addiction. And that's one thing that carnivore certainly will do. It will kill the sugar addiction. I don't think there's any other diet that will do it completely the way that carnivore does. But the sugar addiction is there waiting. You can trigger it and it'll come back. But I think I've overcome it now. I don't feel any further cravings. I ate as many mince pies as I wanted to. And thinking about that thing, which is an interesting matter, I mean, really, the only way that you have of understanding the sorts of foods that you need is to consider what you'd like to eat. And if you eat according to a regime, then you can't do that. But if you allow your fancy to enter the stage, as it were, then you can respond. And presumably there'll be some kind of mechanism whereby the things that you would like to eat correspond to the things that would do you good. Now, that would have to be not considering the matter of addiction, of sugar addiction. And diehards will say, well, anything that it has more than so many carbohydrates is a de facto sugar. So all you're doing is, meeting a sugar addiction need. But I think that's an overly simplistic analysis of a situation. It does turn out that some carbohydrates are perfectly okay. That's why there's bread in the Bible, of course. If they were poisonous, then they wouldn't be allowed. And that's why we have ovens in our houses, and that's why fresh bread smells so wonderful. And it's something that we can have from time to time. It's not to be our staple, I think. There's a risk doing that. But I don't think it's going to be the defeat of our good health. I mean, some people might eat it and find that it doesn't agree with them. And then they'll say, well, I'm just going to be pure carnivore. I think that's very good, if that's what you want to be. But it seems to me that it needs a more nuanced approach. Now, whether my poor health is caused by my deviation from strict carnivore or not caused by it, because I hadn't deviated at first, but worsened by my deviation from carnivore as I tried to correct it. I obviously I can't say. I haven't done any analyses or anything like that. But it's made me think a lot about the diet, and so I thought I'd just have an update after what would be now 8 months, I think. Still counting myself as a carnivore, essentially. I do think it's such healthy food to eat. But I'm thinking of having more regularly having some broccoli or something like that, having learned that it can have an effect on, I don't know what they would call it, just the general level of the metabolism, the rate of metabolism, which might not be optimal for me if I just try to exist on fat. Maybe my body can't handle that. Maybe not everybody's body can handle that, because we're different. God bless.